All right, well, we luckily got to see in the last presentation that men and women don't really age the same way. So I have been doing tons of biomarkers and really diving deep into female longevity. And what's amazing is that one of the most important organs for female longevity is rarely discussed and oftentimes overlooked. So today we're going to be talking about some protocols and also the pacemaker of female longevity. A few of the issues with female longevity are that women are 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients. We're also 80% of autoimmune conditions. We also are the leading cause of our death is cardiovascular disease, but it tends to present in a different way than men, so it can be easily overlooked. And as mentioned in the last talk, we have this expedited pace of aging when we go into menopause. So I believe that if we can extend the length of our ovarian longevity, this would push out the risk of all-cause mortality, including cardiovascular disease, brain health, and so much more. So that's what I'm working on possibly doing. Women were left out of the research. We weren't required to be included in research until about 1993. I'm 35, so I was about 3 years old. It wasn't that long ago. And still today, 2/3 of medical and longevity studies are done on men. And we also know that the funding for female-specific conditions outside of oncology is incredibly sparse. So if you're a woman in the audience or you're a man, you know a woman, then and wanting to optimize your health and improve your longevity, we're likely operating off of male data sets. A crazy story, but important worth noting, is when Ambien came to the market, the dosages for men and women were the same. It took about 13 years for us to actually walk back the dosages, and women were getting into car accidents. They were, having incidents in the morning because it was clear that the dosage was much higher in women when they were awake in the morning than it was in men. So this is one example of not only, medications being misdosed, but also diagnostic criteria. Women, to get a diagnosis, can have to see up to 3 different doctors. Conditions like endometriosis can take 10 to 15 years to diagnose. So there's obviously a huge discrepancy. And that's why in 2018, I started posting my biomarkers online as a woman. I had a medical clinic that I owned and operated. This is actually my husband and I on our first date. So I'm not sure if anyone else has had a first date in a hyperbaric chamber, but we were married in 4 months. And by the way, I sent him about 7 lab tests prior to our first date. And I knew he was either gonna run away quickly or be all in. He was all in. So it was great. So now I really focus my efforts on the idea that the ovaries are aging at about double the speed of every other organ. This is the master clock because, as discussed, when we enter menopause and even perimenopause, we really have big consequences. So the brain, we see a reduction about 20 to 25% in glucose in the brain. The heart, our cardiovascular risk really accelerates. We know that in bones, we can lose up to about 20% of our bone mass in the perimenopause to menopause transition. Our metabolism changes. If any women have gone through this phase of life, you know that the fat goes from being stored around the glutes and the thighs and the hips to more of the visceral fat or truncal fat in the midsection. And that visceral fat in and of itself is inflammatory, so we have metabolism changes. Mood changes. Women already report higher levels of anxiety and depression, but during this phase, estrogen is important for serotonin and dopamine, so we also have mood changes, and our sleep architecture can also change. Lastly, our immune system. I mentioned that 80% of autoimmune conditions are women, so the changes in the immune system that's impacted by the loss of estrogen and the aging of the ovaries, I think is also really important to focus on. So I recently became the first woman to publicly measure her ovarian age. And as we know, all of these labs and diagnostics are always changing and emerging, but I was really excited not to only have a result for myself, but also now that I've done so much through this entire process, and we'll talk about some advanced interventions like rapamycin and plasmapheresis and HBOT, but now I have a baseline, which I do with all my other biomarkers, have a baseline, implement the intervention, and see what may be accelerating or potentially slowing the ovarian age. I got a -5 years younger age, which according to the team that developed this, they had never seen anything like that. So they trained it on about 40,000 non-theoretical data points, women with an actual end date of menopause, and they had never seen a -5 years younger at such an early age, typically like around 41 or 42. There might be a 1 to 2 year younger ovarian age, but typically not so early. But the problem is I can't parse out exactly what I did to get there, but I'm hoping that now I have the baseline, I'll be able to track it quite better. And what's wild is the best prediction that we have at this point as to when you'll enter menopause is when your mother or grandmother enter menopause. And I know I've lived a very different life than my mom, and I also feel like that's just not an adequate answer to a very important problem for women. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 of these hallmarks of ovarian aging. There's actually 9. I'm sure during this conference you guys have heard a ton about the hallmarks of ovarian aging, or the hallmarks of aging, which there's about 14 now. But I'm just going to focus on 4 that I think are really important and potentially actionable for the ovaries. Genomic instability, so the DNA damage that's accumulating. When we're born, we're going to have all the eggs we'll ever have in our life. So all of the damage that we're encountering, whether it be from microplastics or PFAS, it's accumulating in the body and just storing there. Next, cellular senescence. Of course, we know that these zombie-like cells tend to accumulate, and all these hallmarks in the body just seem to be doing it faster in the ovaries. The next is mitochondrial dysfunction, and I'll stick there for just a second because women actually have the highest density of mitochondrial cells in our ovaries over any other organ. There's upwards of 200 to even 600,000 of these mitochondria. So we know that mitochondria is obviously something to focus on for general health, but as a woman, I'm really prioritizing that given it's so important for our quality of oocytes. Next, we have inflammation. We all know about inflammaging and acceleration of inflammation throughout the entire body, but it seems to be happening at a much more rapid pace in the ovaries, seemingly partially because when we ovulate, it's actually an inflammatory event. So a woman having 400 or 500 cycles throughout her life, every time we're ovulating, we have this inflammatory cascade that's actually occurring in the body. It's one of the things I'm going to be trying to target during those specific times. So the first step that I would say if you were looking to understand your own ovarian age and want to think about putting in a protocol is looking at some data. So these are standard labs that we have now. So we have anti-Müllerian hormone, which is a rough measurement of the remaining eggs or follicles. We have FSH and LH, which I am drawing these on days 2 to 5, so between days 2 and 5. And then we have estradiol, progesterone, of course, which wants to be measured in the second half of the cycle. And then inhibin B, which is kind of a measurement of granulosa cell function, and it's much less frequently ordered. So because I want this talk to be really actionable, but I don't know the exact thing that I did to get a younger result, there are a few things that we do know accelerate ovarian aging. And the first one is these chemical exposures. So endocrine disruptors, as we all know, we've now found microplastics in every organ of the body, including the placenta and the testicles. So reducing a lot of these environmental toxins like endocrine disruptors, phthalate, PFAS, anything that's water wicking or Teflon, always trying to avoid that. And heavy metals as well, they seem to accumulate faster in the ovaries. Chronic alcohol, we know, can lead to faster ovarian decline. We also know that it's neurotoxic, increases your risk of cancer, but that's definitely a staple part of the protocol. Smoking, that's one of the fastest accelerators that we know of ovarian aging. And then obesity, and actually body composition matters both ways seemingly. So being way too thin, inducing too much chronic stress on the body and the ovaries, but also of course having too much fat, which can create its own estrogen, knock the hormones out of balance. That also seems to be something that we know can accelerate ovarian aging. So for actionability, I've included a few of the tests that I actually do. I do a test called the total toxic burden. It measures PFAS, molds and mycotoxins, environmental toxin, and heavy metals. So I personally do that about 4 times per year. I started doing it about 6 years ago. Crazy story in LA, actually, I went from having 0 toxins in the high range, and then during the LA fires, it actually spiked up to over 35 toxins in the high range. So that just goes to show, not that you can of course avoid this, but your environment really matters, and then knowing that information and being able to quickly detox is, I think, really important. So I also measure the air quality in every room of my house, so we know if we're being exposed to VOCs, the particulate matter, but we know that air quality can, of course, impact things like cardiovascular disease, but also seemingly impact ovarian aging. Step 3 of this is just implementing a basic protocol. I'm going to talk about how some of these actually could impact ovarian aging. So nutrition and micronutrient density. So here I'm thinking through it as addressing inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction, anti-inflammatory diet, so high omegas and polyphenols, also the nutrient status that you have. So I test mine about 4 times a year as well with a test called the micronutrient test. And this is not just guessing. So you can be eating a healthy diet, but we're not sure if you're getting all the substrates for your mitochondria, for example, that you need. So you can actually do a lab to confirm that you're getting what you need. Also, that removes the random supplementation. So I just supplement what I know I need versus just buying anything that might be trending on the internet. Not eating so late, I think we've all heard this one, but stopping eating 3 to 4 hours prior to bed can allow that natural melatonin to uptick, which is a great antioxidant for ovarian health, and it also really beneficially improves sleep. And then my tracking of the micronutrients. Getting in shape to address the mitochondrial function and the inflammation. Obviously, strength training is incredibly beneficial. We talked about the perimenopause transition, losing a lot of bone mass, so heavy weights and loading, but also muscle is anti-inflammatory. So that's a definite piece that I do, 5-6 times a week, but minimum of 3 or 4 times per week. The aerobic activity for, again, your mitochondrial health. We also know that VO2 max is one of the best predictors of mortality, so you kind of get 2 benefits there at one. And then even walking, great again for the mitochondrial health and metabolic health, which going back to the ovaries is so important. These are a couple of the biomarkers that I track at home. I do quite a few more, but we have a cardiovascular age on Oura Ring. We have some bioimpedance that I obviously confirm in lab with something like a DEXA scan. We have spirometry, so lung health, blood pressure metrics, central blood pressure, augmentation index, which is the measurement of the flexibility of the arteries, essentially, VO2 max. This is actually an old grip strength. Mine is actually now 106. Does anyone in the room, ladies, have a higher one? No? Men? How are the men doing? Because it's kind of embarrassing when men come over our house and I have them do the grip strength tester, and theirs is like the same as mine, and I'm like, I asked my husband, I'm like, do I tell them and be honest for their longevity, or do I just let it slide? And he said, let it slide. So I do that. But these are a couple of the at-home metrics. Metabolic age, I'm 35, mine's 25. So of course these will evolve over time, but I think it's great to have a trend of how you're doing. The next pillar, super important, particularly for women, as again, we know that we report higher levels of stress. Also, I track all my husband's data, and I don't know if any other women in the room do that, but this man has all of the financial responsibility, all the stress in the house, but somehow he's in restored on Oura like all day long. I truly can't understand. All my girlfriends say the same thing. So stress management is a huge one because high levels of cortisol can actually impact our progesterone levels, sleeping 7 to 9 hours, getting morning sun, cool dark room, all the things that you guys likely are doing. Who in the audience has a sleep protocol? Most people? Okay, a few people, yeah. But really optimizing sleep is something that seemingly can contribute in a positive way. Nervous system regulation. I actually did this little test. So the white is bad, white is super high stress, blue is good, that's restorative time. So in 2024, a lot of my days looked like this. I've been an entrepreneur, my whole life, and I didn't think much of it, I felt fine. But I was like, I have to get this into check because I know it's good for longevity. So I built in, just like I would a meeting, 4 intentional parasympathetic breaks per day. Looks like a morning walk in nature. I used some vagal nerve stimulation, some tools, some tech, and I was able to get my stress from looking like that to looking like this in about 6 months. Another cool finding that I have a hyperbaric chamber at home. I've had one for about 8 years. Hyperbaric will immediately put you into parasympathetic, at least for my N of 1 data. So if you're someone that simply can't shift into a more parasympathetic state, then using a tool could be beneficial, and if you have access to one. Measuring sleep, so I always say what gets measured gets managed. So if these are the pillars we want to address for better health as a woman, then we should probably track it. So I have a Whoop, I have the 8 Sleep, I have the Oura Ring, a couple of call-out markers that I'm always looking for. I have an entire team of female physicians that are all experts in their industry. I also have a bunch of PhDs that consult me, so they kind of look at every aspect of this protocol to ensure that the information that we are putting out for women online is as good as it can be. And my doctors have told me to not fall asleep before 10 minutes because it could indicate, sleep debt. and that you want to aim for about 2 hours of REM and 2 hours of deep each night. So that's what I'm always striving for. These are a couple of the tests that I mentioned, but I thought I would just include them here. So total toxic burden. Has anyone ever done this test? Okay, one person. Okay, it's a great test to understand. A lot of times you can be exposed to things in the clinic. I would see, thousands of people take this test. They all came in thinking they were going to have a super low toxic burden. They're like, my house is great, my water's filtered, I'm purifying my air, but they had no idea about potential VOCs or manufacturing plant that they were living next to. So it's a really good indicator because we now know that these environmental toxins are really impactful to health and obviously accumulating quickly in the ovaries. Mitochondrial function, since we want to optimize that, I test it. I do a test called the MitoMe, and there's other ones, organic acids test. We actually measure our mitochondrial function and improve it with different interventions. The test that I did for the ovarian age was the Timeless Biotech. It's rolling out in clinics around the country, I believe, so I think it's available. And then also thinking about genetics. So if you are a woman that has, compromised detoxification pathways, then you might need to lean in harder on detoxification, whether that be sauna or depending on what it is, you do chelation or whatever it may be. But knowing your risks, I think, is really important in terms of how you structure your protocol. Some of the advanced therapies, so I've been doing these all for years. We offered many of these therapies in the clinic that I opened in 2020, but I'm going to talk through why I think the mechanism makes sense. And obviously we don't have the data and scientific backing to say, okay, hyperbaric oxygen therapy is going to improve your ovarian environment. So a lot of this is my consultants and researchers just operating off mechanism. But therapeutic plasma exchange, if anyone has heard of that or done it, they remove the plasma from your body, replace it with albumin. There's newer technologies called immunopheresis, which can better target different particles that they're removing. But I did this after the LA fire experiment, and I went from having the 35 toxins in the high range. It cut all the toxins by about 11% after one treatment. So if you do have a very high environmental toxin burden, that could be something that I see us using in the future. HBOT is what I just wrapped up. So I just did about 40 sessions of hyperbaric. Our ideas here, if HBOT chambers can, revascularize penises and help to improve erectile dysfunction, it can likely do something for the ovarian environment as well. So thinking about improving blood flow, nutrient delivery, potentially lengthening the telomeres, which is a hallmark of ovarian aging. And then red light therapy. So we're gonna parse out each one of these. I just did the 40 sessions of HBOT. I have the test results pending, so I'll be able to post if my N of 1 accelerated ovarian aging, slowed it down, did nothing. We'll have to see. But then we're also gonna try red light therapy. There are preclinical studies showing a reduction in oxidative stress and reduction in inflammation in the ovarian environment, so I'm excited for that one. And targeted peptides. These are peptides that I've done at different times for different reasons. But we're going to be trying SS31 potentially for mitochondrial health, GLP-1 potentially for metabolic health, BPC. Of course, these are all off-label, but could be supportive, and I'm excited to test before and after. For mitochondrial support, we're going to be doing a few supplements, so urolithin A, MitoQ, hopefully to potentially improve mitochondrial function in the ovaries, and then we'll test. And the last one that I'm really excited about, and I don't know exactly when we'll put this into the protocol, but some of the new research out of Dr. Duncan's lab at Northwestern shows that the ovarian environment actually becomes much stiffer or thickening as we age. So potentially using antifibrotic could potentially help the ovarian environment. So that's also something that we intend on looking at. Another exciting trial to watch that I have done myself is the rapamycin trial, the Vibrant trial that's going on at Columbia. They have hypothesized a potential 5-year pushback of ovarian aging, so that's super exciting. I have been doing this similar dosing. The results are not yet out, but I'm very excited to watch it because I think this could be a game changer. Essentially, the mechanism would be to slow down the follicle recruitment every month because for anyone that doesn't know, we recruit all of these follicles. Most of them die every month. 1 or 2 is selected to be the egg that gets fertilized, but then the rest are just gone. So if we can keep more of those, it ideally would, extend ovarian longevity. So that's a good one to watch. If you're past the phase, if you're past all this and you're in menopause, I think it's important to note that all of these pillars are still really addressable for general health, but I think our best intervention as of today is hormone therapy. A lot of the reasons why we declined is because of the loss of hormones. I'm very excited that we've now removed the black box warning. The results of the Women's Health Initiative have largely been put to rest, and now we have that as an option. If you were to start today, I would look at my ovarian age, I would implement the basic protocols and consider advanced toxin testing. And I'm past my time, so thank you so much.